Welcome to the Water People podcast. Today, we're in conversation with Tory Strange, a Floridian legend, as both an accomplished surfer and owner of one of the most community-driven surf shops on the planet. Tory has helped to shape U.S. East Coast surf culture by nurturing the careers of so many surfers like tour competitor Gabe Kling and writer Xander Morton, and more broadly, by creating a place where so many of us, myself included, learned what it meant to be part of a community of water people. This episode is presented in partnership with Who Gives a Crap. If nothing else, I feel like 2020 has taught us how much we collectively value our health, our community, and toilet paper.
Yes, that's right, Lauren. What about the time when we were with our little guy in the pool and a swimming lesson went horribly wrong and I was holding him as he let out a big brown cloud into the pool? And at that point, we really realised how unprepared we were. And we had zero cleaning supplies, toilet paper, napkins, tissues, anything at all. We had nothing. Basically just super parenting rookies. And we'd also just rocked up to the swimming lesson covered in sand, zinc, and basically pretty feral compared to all the other parents. And so since that day, we have always stored a spare roll of Who Gives a Crap in our car or bags or anywhere basically, so that we're ready for anything our toddler's going to throw at us.
We support Who Gives a Crap because they're committed to using their business for good. No plastic packaging, TP made from recycled textbooks, and they donate half of their profits to help improve sanitation and build toilets for the 2 billion living without one. They know that making a difference begins with small changes that can have big impact. You can make a difference with your TP budget too by going to whogivesacrap.org right now and use the coupon code WATERPEOPLE to get $10 off your first subscription. That's $10 off your first subscription purchase at whogivesacrap.org with coupon code WATERPEOPLE. Our podcast comes to you from the coastal land and waters of both the Bundjalung and Gubbi Gubbi nations. We'd like to acknowledge these traditional custodians and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We'd also like to extend that respect to all First Nations people this podcast ripples out toward. I just wanted to make a note that we recorded this interview with Tory last September, so October 2019, and so much has changed in the world since then. So I just wanted to create a little bit of time context for that conversation and let you all know that we talk about some not adult themes, but themes that might not be the most appropriate for children. Toward the end of the conversation, we talk about guns and gun control and the sort of attitude toward owning firearms in the South. So that might not be appropriate for all listeners. I was really interested to talk about guns because it's something that's talked about a little bit in my house. And Davey, I felt like you might have some thoughts and ideas to weigh on with a more international perspective, which can be so valuable, to have friends and to have loved ones who have perspectives outside of the ones that we grew up with ourselves.
Yeah, guns. So it comes as a real surprise as someone from New Zealand and Australia to be in households in America where there are multiple guns in the house, and especially in very, very safe, quiet suburban neighborhoods in Florida where I encountered my first American guns, and it was a little frightful, but also quite comedic because it was when we were first together, and I was meeting your dad probably for one of the first times, and here I am, this bizarre novelty coming from the other side of the planet, Australia, and we're talking cultural differences, and eventually guns comes up, and I'm like, oh, you don't have guns in the house, do you, Charlie? And he's just gone, you wait right there, and walked into the bedroom and just basically walked in and walked straight back out with a huge shotgun loaded and a pistol.
I don't think it was loaded.
Well, it seemed like it was scary enough for me.
It definitely wasn't loaded.
Okay.
But
what was the ching thing he did then?
That's just cocking the barrel into place.
See, even that you, the most pacifist person I've ever met knows the difference is radical. You've just had a life where they're just around, and they're not always around, but it's part of the identity and cultural story over there. And so that sort of blew my mind. So I've been on my best behavior ever since because of that. So thanks, Charlie. But it was a real eye-opener, just that there were houses in a very safe, secure neighbourhood where pretty much every house would have had a gun in it, according to Charlie. And it's so different coming from Australia, where you have guns on, rural properties to take care of perhaps animals that are coming in and taking out your livestock and stuff like that. And there's certainly some guns in some, organised crime sort of circles in the cities and whatnot, but it's really not part of the picture and part of our identity. So it's a real shock to see how accepted and part of life it is over there.
We've talked about this issue quite a lot over the years, especially since having our little guy, Minnow, and especially in the context of traveling back to the States as a family unit. And you really enlightened me to the added layer of danger you have in a society where carrying guns and having the ever-present sort of danger of lots of different kinds of people having guns being an issue. I mean, has that been a real fear factor for you?
Oh, totally. When we go there, and, homelessness is a really big issue in America as well, and people really being under the pump when it comes to being overworked, very small amount of holiday time for working Americans over there. So to me, that's a recipe for stress as well. Then we add in the last few years of sort of political divisiveness and it seeming
reactionary politics.
Very, very different place when we went there the last time, and seeing that people were, to me as an outsider, being far more openly aggressive towards each other, and some racist experiences that I witnessed over there that didn't seem to be there 10 years ago when we first met. I'm sure they were there, but maybe just not as overt. And it just felt like perhaps the political characters that were being really overtly divisive seemed to be giving people the permission to do the same thing on a street level. So that was really disconcerting, especially with a young grommet. And we're white people in a position of privilege. So imagine how scary it is for everyone else who's different from that norm. As someone coming from another culture, it just made me very curious about the reasoning behind it. And it doesn't seem like it's our best selves that are choosing to have guns. It feels like it's a very much a fear-based decision. It's like, oh, I'll get a gun, not because I love them and they make the world a wonderful place, but because what if somebody does come into our house, or you have a road rage moment and you don't have something to defend yourself with, and that's often the argument that people have.
I talk about this in the interview, but I really wanted to interview Tory because he's had a huge influence on my own life, and because he's been really outspoken in a kind of radical way in a community where it's still left of center to talk about the idea of not having guns, of forfeiting holding guns in houses and in families. And that's exactly what's happened in Australia, isn't it? There was an amnesty where, as a culture, you all said, this isn't making our lives better.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to touch on some of these issues that are a little bit more peripheral to ocean culture in general, but we felt like they were still important to have conversations about, especially considering the upcoming election. And we hope everyone is getting involved, having great conversations with people you love and people in your community, and definitely getting out and exercising your extreme privilege to vote. We hope you enjoy the episode. I'd love for you to tell us a story. Tell us a story about a time or experience after which you could never be the same.
Right, yes. My father wanted me to be a pro golfer, and he worked at the golf course and he managed the golf course, and that's what he wanted me to do. And when I discovered surfing, he knew I was a young kid and thought it was good and all, but he kept wanting to push me towards playing golf. And I like golf, it was nice, but it wasn't anything like surfing. I mean, there's nothing like being in the ocean. The thing about golf, you can play golf all afternoon, you can be having fun. And then on the 18th hole, you can shank it in the woods, and then you can 3-putt. And it's like you spent 4 hours and you're like in a bad mood. You're like, why did I do that? You know? And you spent money to do it. Whereas I can honestly say, surfing, I have never had a bad surf session. I mean, how many of you think of all the surfers out there, if you think that you went surfing, usually it's a good experience. Even if the waves aren't that good. You're having fun. You're in the ocean. And it doesn't matter whether you're a good surfer, a bad surfer, a beginning surfer, an expert surfer. When you're learning, you're having a blast. You know, I remember the first time that I was going backside right because I'm goofy foot, and I turned back and went front side left. And I was like, you can go 2 different ways on a wave. Holy cow, this is amazing. And I just, you know, and that was as a kid. And later I learned to switch foot and just all these different things with surfing. It's just, so much fun. So that's what I really wanted to do.
What kind of dad was your dad?
Well, he was always at work, and it was always, we were going to get to know each other later. And he was just always working. So I never really knew my dad. And that's sad. But the tragic thing that happened was he was killed. He was coming home from working, and it was foggy. It was late one night, and a semi was doing a U-turn on US 1 here in between Jacksonville and St. Augustine, and he was going too fast for the foggy conditions and went right under the semi and killed him instantly. So my only solace is, he was here 1 minute and gone the next. And I remember that night, them waking us up, and my mom was crying, and we didn't sleep that night. The next morning, my mother told me, Tory, you can take the day off, go do whatever you want. And I was like, gosh, what am I going to do? You know what? And I thought, I'll hitchhike to the beach. And we were right there on Anastasia Boulevard, and I went out and I stuck my thumb out, and a surfer picked me up and took me to the beach. I had my board with me, and I went surfing. And the ocean was real stirred up that day, and I remembered it just real vividly,
What else do you remember about the ocean that day?
Oh, I mean, it was just metaphoric to, all that was going on in my life. And I remember the surfers that were out there. Joe Beach, he's still a friend to this day. But I remember thinking, and I feel really guilty about this, because one of them was like, gosh, now I get to surf. That was very selfish of me, because he didn't want me to surf. But I knew bigger than that, way bigger than that, was I knew that I had to do something with my life. And, it was life-changing, life-altering. And my mom was a single mom then. So she luckily had gone and gotten her nursing degree, but she was trying to raise us 3 kids. But I knew I would have to get a job at a young age to help the family, because we, to make the house payment and all. And,
were you the oldest?
I was in the middle. I had an older sister and a younger brother. And my older sister handled it quite differently. She escaped into drugs. And I remember her telling me one time they had, people were bringing over food, and she ate a whole chocolate cake. So that was the only thing that made her feel better. So she kept eating and eating. And then my younger brother, he became a cop, Bo. And as I think him, and he's just epic now. He ended up being a resource officer in the schools and helping bring one of our skate parks to town here. And he's awesome. But we went through a real hard time. My mom eventually remarried Mr. Vale. He had 4 kids of his own. So, there were 7 of us. We were like a big Brady Bunch. And so,
how old were you when they got together?
Well, I remember they were together when I was 15, and they went off to Maine. He had a house in Maine, and they left me here by myself. I didn't have a car. I lived out at Vail Point, so I took the boat, and I would take the boat and go all through the Intercoastal Waterway and drive it over to the backside of the beach and Salt Run, and I would walk across the dune, and I would surf all day, and I'd go back and I'd get in the boat, and I would take it back to Vail Point and stay at Vail Point. And then if the boat ran out of gas, I'd walk up to US 1 and I'd hitchhike to the beach. So, and then some other friends would put me up. So I had to learn. So
did they stay in Maine? They came back, right?
Every summer they stayed in Maine.
Okay.
So she'd be gone for like 3 months, and she'd come back.
And so when they were here, you were living with
a bunch
of other people that you didn't know.
Or live out Vail Point. There was a little house next to the big house where my parents lived.
You were 15 years old, and basically living on your own, making your own way in the world.
Yes. And I've got an interesting story along those lines. One day I was going to the beach, going through the state park, and I saw a guy with a sail on his board. And I thought, that's surfing, but with the wind. So I had to stop, and I had to learn. I taught myself how to windsurf. And then I ended up buying the business from him because the gentleman that had it he saw that it was a growing sport. He didn't do it for the love of the sport. And I just loved the sport. And I ended up giving lessons, teaching other people how. And that came in handy later on in my business career. Before I opened the surf station, I made money giving windsurf lessons. And then when I opened the surf station, giving surf lessons.
Do you feel like the ocean raised you in some ways?
Oh, a lot of ways, yes, of course.
I feel the same.
I kind of turned to it, after my dad's death. And, I still love it to this day. I get up at daybreak every day. I do a surf report, and it's my way of sharing it with the world. And it ties into business, but really, I think I'd do it if it didn't tie into business. I want to be up and I want to see the sunrise, see a new day, see the ocean, see what it's doing. And it's interesting because, I don't take a lot of vacations, but if I do and I come back, it takes me a while to get kind of tuned in because you can see the ocean moves up about 45, 50 minutes each day with the tide and then the moon, and you're factoring it all in, and the winds. And now there's so much technology, you can see the answers to why you had these questions as to, why is the wind shifting, or it's rotating clockwise, and now I notice it going counterclockwise, and then there's bad weather, and that's because, here in the northern hemisphere, the natural progression of the wind is a clockwise rotation. And if it goes back the other way, a lot of times bad weather's coming. And I would notice these things. I watched the sunrise come up each day a little bit further north and then back a little further south in the winter. And it's fascinating, it's fun, and it's a routine. And, you hear it, gosh, the Indians back in the day, they noticed all these things, and people watching the stars noticed all these things. And I feel like I'm part of that in the universe, noticing these things and recording these things and sharing these things. And whether it's just real basic, the waves are choppy today, it's need a waist high, might get better with incoming tide, or whether we put something a little deeper in. Usually I don't get too deep,
But to pay attention is also to be deep.
Yeah.
Like most people go and live and work inside of four walls and never pay attention to the world around them at all, have no connection to what the wind is doing. And I feel like that's one of the great gifts of being a surfer is to pay attention. There's so much joy around to be engaged with around us.
If you're a surfer and you're really into surfing, you become an amateur meteorologist at the least, because you want to know the weather. Want to know what's going to produce the waves, and what does produce the waves? Well, it's the weather. It's the wind blowing over the ocean. Or it's the time, duration, the intensity, you've got all these factors.
Yeah. So we've known each other for quite a long time. Since I started surfing when I was probably 14 when you brought me on to the team for Surf Station and then the girl next door. So 14, 24, that's 20 years. And the story you just told about your dad, I feel like unravels so much of who you are. Do you feel that way? You are renowned for your work ethic, for your stoke in your work ethic, but for being one of the hardest working people that anyone around here knows. Do you feel like you modeled your dad's pattern?
He was a very hard worker, and I learned from that. And the thing that we have to do in life, of course we can learn from books and we can learn from other people, but we learn from our life experiences. And one of the life experiences I learned was not make the same mistake my dad made, which was not spending time with me. And I realized he was working a lot, and I totally forgive him. There's no hard feelings. I love my dad, and hopefully in heaven someday we'll hug each other and all that, but not make the same mistake in that with my kids, I spend a lot more time with them. In fact, they're like, no, Dad, now they're 18 and 20. They grow and they move on. But when they were younger, I spent a whole lot more time with them.
That's so great. As a dad, my dad worked really hard when I was growing up, and I feel like I didn't get to spend a lot of time with him. Apparently dads now spend about 4 times more time with their children than dads of the past did.
Yeah. And I made some of the mistakes. There was times that I had to work that I wasn't there.
It's a hard balance,
it's a real hard balance. And then I realized, and that, I'd have some reminders that stepped in, and I'd have to, regroup and rethink. And as parents, we love our children. Think how much you love your child. You're like, so you just, there's like, no greater love,
None. Sorry to interrupt the conversation, but we wanted to take a moment to recognize the generous folks who have supported us this season. The Water People podcast is brought to you by the fine folks at Sanuk. In 1997, founder Jeff Kelly started out with one simple goal: to make people smile, and to encourage them to pass it on. Sanuk has been advocating for a more playful and inclusive surfing culture for more than 2 decades, while crafting some of the comfiest footwear around. Thanks, Sanuk, for your support and for encouraging water people around the globe to protect their happy places. Learn more about Sanuk's partnership with the Surfrider Foundation at sanuk.com. Thanks also to Gary McNeil Concepts, who build cosmic surfboards for cosmic people. We love Gary McNeil's enthusiasm for building boards, and especially his passion for combining recycled and plant-based materials to craft boards that simultaneously prioritize durability, sustainability, and high performance. For custom orders and to check out the gallery of boards currently available, head to his website, garymcneilconcepts.com.au. Can you tell me about the first time you went to Hawaii? How old were you?
Yes, this was a life-altering event and came because of my love for surfing and my in-depth for surfing. First of all, let's go back a little bit. We're going to go back before the internet and before the way you got your information was Surfer and surfing magazines. And there were a few movies out, The Endless Summer, and there was Pacific Vibrations. And
what year is this?
You're going through the 1970s and through the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And when you're growing up, if you want to be a surfer, the proving grounds, and they still are to this day, are Hawaii. So if you're really into surfing, your goal is to go to Hawaii and surf and test yourself and see how you can do, and just to enjoy the experience of what you see in the magazines. You see waves that in Florida, you don't see waves like that. Ever. Nothing like that. If you do get a hurricane swell, it's brown and just blown out, giant slop. And here you can see a big, giant blue water, open tube, someone dropping in with their hands up in the air. It's amazing. So I always wanted to go. So there's a person in St. Augustine. He's no longer with us, but his name is Wild Bill Eichels, and he did the underwater surf photography for ABC's Wild World of Sports back in the 1960s. And he would travel to Hawaii, and he'd come back to St. Augustine, and he would bring films, and we would see actual movies. And we'd go to the local surf shop, and he charged $1. That's how he made his money. $1 was a lot of money back then. And if you were really cool, he'd let you in for free. And Bill and I, we were tight because he'd let me in for free to see the movies. And then one day he told me he would take me to Hawaii on one of his trips. And I was like, oh, wow.
What year is that?
And I was a teenager, so it was way before the surf station when he told me. But we planned this for a few years. And I didn't get to go until the winter of 1983. And it was before I opened the surf station. But anyway, so we were planning to go, and he was going to put me up. And then his girlfriend, for whatever reason, I don't know if the listeners out there know that guys will do anything for girls. Anyway, his girlfriend didn't want him to go. So he told me at the last minute that he was going to stay in St. Augustine. Well, I had already bought my ticket. And so my place to stay, which was with him, had vanished. So I had a life decision. Do I not go, or do I go by myself? And I asked him where I'd stay. He said he didn't know. So I got in the yellow page of the phone book. I'm not sure how I found it, but I called a real estate office in Hawaii, in Honolulu. It was a Century 21, and I called and said, do you know where there's a place to stay? Well, the guy that answered the phone happened to want a roommate, just happened chance. But he said he'd meet me at the airport and he'd find me a place to stay. I said, okay. So I knew I was going. I got on the plane and didn't know where I was going to stay. I had my backpack with my clothes, but I knew I was going to Hawaii and I was going to live the surfer's dream. So I got off the phone, got off the plane. He picked me up, and the guy was like 3 times older than me. He was like this old man, but he was there and he gave me a ride. And he goes, I got a place for him. We went way up in the mountains up in Haleiwa, and he lived in this house that he was a really weird dude. He never made any like moves sexually or anything, but he was just weird. He was a pack rat. He had stuff all over. He had 2 TVs and they were always on. And he had just stuff stacked all throughout the house. And I was in this back room and there's other stuff in there. And he had an aquarium with all this dirt and there were worms growing in the aquarium. And so when I'd look at the aquarium, I'd see the worms going through it. And I remember just thinking, this is my trip to Hawaii. And I was there in Waiiwa, which is about 20 minutes to the North Shore and about 40 minutes to the South Shore. I didn't have a car, but I brought enough money with me to buy a car. And I talked him into taking me to a used car lot. And I bought an old 1966 Chevy Nova, filled it with gas. And the first time I drove around, I thought, I'm going to drive around the island. And I stopped and got some fruit. And being an educated person that I was, I knew that the banana peel was organic. So I threw the banana peel out the window, just fresh white boy in Hawaii. Well, some Hawaiians that were right behind me, there's a group of 3 big mokes, and they saw this little white boy throw what they thought was trash out the window. And so they started screaming at me, honking the horn. And luckily, I was smart enough to realize these guys saw what happened and they're going to beat my you-know-what. So I kept driving and they kept honking and they'd almost run into me from behind. But I knew I had a full tank of gas and I had my Chevy Nova. And I must have went around the island 3 times till they had to stop. But that's my first story. My second story is I needed a job. I wanted to stay there and it was cool up in the mountains. And I thought, well, I need to go down, and I think down in Honolulu, Waikiki Beach might have some work. So I went down to Waikiki and I walked on the beach, and there was a girl teaching people how to windsurf. But she was having a hard time. There was people wanting lessons, and she was carrying the boards up. And I thought, well, maybe she needs some help. Maybe I could get a job with her. And she said, oh, I don't know if they're hiring or not, but I got put on this job, and I could tell she was stressed. She goes, I need help. And she goes, but you don't work for us, so you can't. She goes, go and ask them if they'll hire you. So I went to the next beach stand, and it was a Hawaiian dude. I said, hey, are you hiring? He goes, nah, next stand, you got to go to the next stand. So I went down to the next beach stand, and I said, are you guys hiring? No, you got to go see Clyde. Clyde? Okay. So I went, hey, Clyde, to the next stand. Oh, Clyde Icao. He's upstairs, up in the. So I went up there and I said, sir, I'm here and I'm looking for a job. He goes, so you want a job? He goes, why would I hire you? I said, well, I know how to windsurf, and your girl down there on the beach, she's having a hard time teaching. He goes, well, go help her. I said, okay. So he sent one of the beach boys. They told me up there and they told her to, and I helped her. I had blue jeans on because it was cool up in the mountains. And it was hot down there, and I carried windsurfers up and down the beach the whole day. Took my shirt off, got sunburned, and went in my blue jeans. And then she was very thankful, and she said, "Can you come back tomorrow?" I said, "Yes, I'll come back." And I went back to Clyde, and I said, "I'd like a job." He goes, "Go help her another day." I said, "Okay." So I went and helped her another day. So I helped her for 2 days, and then she wanted a day off. And he goes, "Okay, you run her stand." I thought, okay, I know how to run a stand, because I had taught windsurfing back here in St. Augustine. See, the other beach boys there hadn't yet picked up on windsurfing, so they didn't know how. So Clyde ended up giving me my own beach stand, and it was on commission-only basis. It was 30% of the gross, and so I would schmooze with the tourists. I learned the Japanese word for deposit is hoshikin, and you had to get a deposit. And I would stay late, and I'd hose off the sails, and I really built up a clientele. I spent the winter there teaching windsurfing, and the stand would do better and better throughout the years, and it started doing better than the other stands. One day, some of the Hawaiian dudes came up, and they said, "Bro, you're making us look bad." Just seeing what was happening was a lot of those guys were swiping some of the money. And me being an honest guy, I was always turning in all my money. But Clyde and I became good friends, and we exchanged Christmas cards afterwards. And my most rewarding thing was, here it is, a legendary Hawaiian, Eddie Akao's brother. When I left at the end of my stay, when I was coming back to Florida, he said, "Tory, brah, anytime you want a job, you come back to Hawaii, I give you a job." So that was very rewarding for me to know I've always got a job in Hawaii. And whenever I go out, I always try to look Clyde up, and it's very satisfying. But I did get to experience Hawaii, and the winter of '83, if you look it up, was one of the larger years on record. It was like the biggest winter in 20 years. And they would be waiting for it to get below 12 feet so you could surf for a lot of the guys. It was just out of control, just 20 feet north shore. And I did paddle out a few times and learn.
Where?
I surfed Waimea one time at 15 feet, just when it starts breaking. But I learned, I loved all of it. The only thing about living in Hawaii, one of the things I learned, one of the things that you do appreciate being from Florida, when you're in Florida, this is my home. When you're in Hawaii, that's the Hawaiians' home. And they explained to me, the Hawaiians that were nice to me, I got to be good friends with a lot of my coworkers. They go, Tory, we used to go up and down the beach looking for a white boy like you just to beat him up, just for beating him up, And there's prejudice like that in Florida against other races. And so they were prejudiced, but a lot of them realized if you're there to help them, and I got to be good friends, and I consider them some of my very best friends, but it wasn't my home. And I think we all want a sense of home. Everywhere, wherever people live, that's your home. And you can visit other places, but you always have a home. Now, you have two homes.
I
You
do.
have an Australian
I'm lucky.
home and a Florida home. That's very, very good.
Yeah.
And my home is St. Augustine.
Yeah. How was it being, as a Florida gal who spent some time in Hawaii and been terrified in the ocean there, paddling out when it's like head high, and then by the time you have to paddle in or try to get in, it's double overhead plus, because the swell can come up so quickly there. I have to say that I've gotten my ass handed to me.
Oh, yes.
And how is experiencing the power difference between gentle, warm Floridian waves and Hawaiian wintertime power?
Humbling. It's humbling.
So humbling.
And there's times I've been out, and then the sets keep getting bigger, and you keep having to paddle farther out. Well, then you're just paddling into bigger and bigger sets, and you're like, how the heck am I going to get? I'm going to have to catch one of these to get in. So it's humbling.
It is.
And you learn your limits, and I think each man, you're married to a man that charges giant waves. That's very respectful. And I think every surfer at some point learns their limit. Very few tackle it. Who tackles it 50 feet or 40 feet or 30 feet? As you go up, it's less and less people.
Yeah.
And there's some people that here in Florida it gets overhead high. And you don't see them around too much.
Yeah. Even with the Dorian swell, and I think it's so unfair for Floridian surfers, right? We have this long, flat summer. You're lucky if you get to paddle 4 strokes to get out the back, because you can just walk.
Right.
You just walk. It's lapping on the shore. And then all of a sudden a hurricane comes, and you're expected to be able to duck dive again after not having duck dove for 4 or 5 months through flat spring and summer. It's just a very humbling place to grow up as a surfer.
And we have to cross train, and you have to surf sloppy waves and waves that aren't near as good. And some of the best surfers in the world come out of Florida because they train so hard. They surf in anything, and then they know how to harness the power of a wave because it's not just handed to them. I remember in Hawaii, there'd be really good waves and people aren't surfing. And I'm like, they're waiting for it to get even better. I'm like, this is great by Florida standards. And so we're an appreciative group of people.
Speaking of great Floridian surfers, you've known many of them. So you were in Hawaii the winter of '83. How long after that did you open the surf station?
When I came back, the surf station's been in existence 35 years. And we opened in 1984.
Wow,
so I came right back, and I used a lot of that business, what I learned out there, running a stand, and we rolled right into it. I came back, and I'd done what I always wanted to do, go to Hawaii and discover. And then I thought, I'm ready to do a career move now. And I came back as a young man, opened the surf station, And
I have to say, the surf station has played a huge role in the community of Florida surfers, and of course in the community of St. Augustine surfing. It's been a home for many of us, a second home, a family, the place where many of us had our first jobs. I had my first job there, and it's springboarded a lot of our, a lot of our surfing lives and our careers. And so I'm so grateful to you for having that dream.
Well, thank you.
And seeing it through. And I guess it also speaks to kind of a different era in surfing when surf shops were the sort of crux of a surfing community.
Right. And it was changing, and I'm stoked to be part of that change. Well, way back, a surf shop was where they made surfboards, and you could go buy the factory. And then they transitioned into selling T-shirts and clothing, and then there was an era that they were put in malls, and they didn't even have surfboards. It was all about clothing. But in my era, I would hang out at them, and different shops had different feels. Some of them were like, hey, beat it. You're not buying anything. You're just coming here and hanging out. And I remember thinking whenever I open my store, I want it to be a hangout. And I've truly, thought about that. Come hang out. Just come hang out. And one of the things we do at the shop, we sell beer, because I bought a gas station and it happened to sell beer. So it was kind of by accident, but I didn't. It was a gas station that had cigarettes. Now, I did do away with the cigarettes right away. We all have our moral compass. And I was like, well, do I do away with the beer? And being a young surfer that liked to drink beer, I thought, well, we'll keep it. And it's been one of the things a surfer can go up and he's looking at boards, and, you offer him a Heineken or whatever, and, the surfer relaxes. And so just that.
That sounds like good business to me.
Yeah.
Social lubrication.
And now I'm noticing at the shop lately, and I haven't stopped it, is our morning guy, Josh. He works 8 to 3, and then he's off at 3, and I come in at 4, and he's still there, and he's drinking a beer. And I'm like, Josh, because my first, and I'll come in, I'm flashing that he's working and drinking beer. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, no, I clocked out an hour ago. I'm just hanging out. And he'd hang out with whoever's working the evening shift, and they're talking story, and then he's in the boardroom, and he may sell another board, or just, and one of the other workers may come in, if it rolls into happy hour, and get a beer and hang out, and it's totally harmless. None of them are getting drunk. It's early in the day, and they're just having a beer after work. And when we had our surf team, the adult ones, I remember when Foster's, a beer from Australia, was popular for a while. Hey, you win the contest and you get a 6-pack of Foster's. And so the guys were all the guys in the men's division, charge it. You got to win and get that Foster's. And they'd come and they'd all drink a beer, in front of the shop. And it's a hangout. And it's a different way to run your business rather than all business, for sure.
It's totally different. I mean, most respectable establishments of business have signs that say no loitering.
No loitering. Right.
No shoes, no shirt, no service.
Well, and Jerry at Nalu's, he's been there 17 years. And he was in Hawaii and learned a lot about fish tacos and opened the first food truck in St. Augustine. And so people get their fish tacos and they'll come over and they'll eat on the bench out front. And then we have a shave ice stand. You come by and get a shave ice. And then we have a skate park right next door. And we're right at the entrance to the state park where you go check the waves. And so it's a hangout. And now that the amphitheater in St. Augustine, it's a venue for some of the best music in the Southeast. And we have the little marquee, our little reader board out front, and whatever band is coming, we'll pick a lyrics out of their songs that has to do with the ocean, and we'll put it on there. And we've had members of the band that have stopped in before and check out the store.
I remember bands playing at the surf station. I remember doing big movie nights in the parking lot. I mean, it really was being a young person growing up in a pretty sleepy town where there's lots of time and opportunity to get into big trouble doing less productive things than surfing. The surf station was a place to go and hang out and link up with friends. And at least there were some older chaperone-ish people
the parents
around.
They knew, I mean, yes, we'd give the young kids red bellies, to keep them in line. Jimmy Wilson could tell a story along those lines.
Yeah,
Sometimes
there was a whole hazing side to being part of.
We were bad, but we mellowed out in years, and we never crossed the line. We got right up to the line, but we didn't cross the line. we might have blurred the line a little bit, but and most of that was I'm pleading the fifth here. I would be up in the office, and Scott Calvin and Brian Hornung and Jimmy Wilson, Xander was down there, Xander Morton, Gabe Kling was by. I used to give Gabe Kling red bellies. But I took him to surf contests too. And,
that's good balance.
So we've had a really good time.
Can you talk about some of the other influential surfers that you've built relationships with because of the shop?
well, the Codgins, Claudia Codgin and his son Mark Codgin, Stephen Slater, and then both of Stephen's older brothers. Stephen used to come with us to surf contests, and we'd go to contests up and down the coast, and loved surfing the Wave Masters in Jacksonville, Mitch Kaufman's contest. And I remember surfing against Jesse Fernandez, great longboard surfer, and just having a good time with all, Matt Keckley. Gosh, we become good friends over the years. Yeah, and then of course, Al Merrick and the whole Channel Islands crew. I traveled to Santa Barbara and hung out with those guys and gotten to see their factory. And, it's so funny that the first time I was there, Tom Curran was right. This is before the Kelly era. And I went out there and they were selling boards worldwide, shipping them. And it was just 4 people in a little room about the size of this. And now they've just grown and they're, way bigger than before. But they were big back then,
I mean, that just reminds me of what just an incredible member of this community you've been. You've fostered so many of our surfing lives. And especially for me, one of the biggest influences was the Girl Next Door, the first all-women surf shop on the East Coast, really pioneering. What led to that decision?
Well, seeing you and the other girls around going, they deserve their own surf shop. And I guess because y'all were always around the shop and that I thought that, wow, and part of it was a business thing. Hey, these girls need a shop. Let's give them a shop.
The whole industry saw the same thing.
Yeah. And so the Girl Next Door was born. And I remember we put surfboards in the shop. But what happened was the girls would come in and look at, there was like 10 boards with flowers on them and all, and they'd go upstairs where the guys were, and they wanted what the guys were riding.
Yeah.
You too.
Yeah.
You go,
yeah.
And what's interesting now, the Girl Next Door has shrunk way down, and we have more of a boutique store. It's called Linen and Waves. But we still have the Girl Next Door tucked in real small. I mean, most of our clientele, it's probably 80% guys, probably even 90%.
Was that always the case? Even when the Girl Next Door was in its heyday? Did it ever?
Yeah, we had a good little run with it. Remember we put on some girl surf contests?
Oh, yeah. And I helped run at least one of them.
Yeah.
I feel like there was a heyday. And then I feel like so there was this great magazine a handful of years ago called Salted that one of the editors at Surfer Magazine started. It was Salted Magazine by Surfer Magazine. It was all women.
Right.
It ended up getting legs, was financially sound, it was independent, it was doing well, it was selling well. But Jana, the editor who started it, wanted to leave the surf industry and get a real job. And the guys from Surfer, even though it was a self-sustaining business, they wanted nothing to do with women surfing.
Right.
So it never got the energy that it needed to keep going, so it folded. Did you feel like the Girl Next Door maybe suffered from that a little bit? That there wasn't the sustained energy that it would have needed?
Well, and I think a lot of it had to do with the surf industry overall. Remember that they were selling clothing in the malls, and the mall stores became popular, and surf shops, to survive, had to get more into just surfboards. And just the sheer volume of girls, there were less girls. And so we had to make Girl Next Door more foo-foo-y in order to sell more girls' products. And then as the years went by, I was like, what am I doing running foo-foo-y? I don't know nothing about foo-foo-y. so it would get less, it would get staffed less because the sales were down. And then finally I just said, I called up my brother Bo, who his wife was looking for a career move. I said, you take over Girl Next Door. And she said, well, I want my own thing. I go, well, name it what you want. Do what you want with it. And it's called Linen and Waves, and it's a boutique. And it's very successful because she puts her own pizzazz on it, and she's a mom. And it's got stuff for young moms, but we hung on to the name, and it's hanging on by a thread.
I think the girl has to go now. That was a different time.
So, and that ties right into what we just did. We just brought in Surf Station women's sweatshirts. We didn't bring back this year. The first year we didn't bring back Girl Next Door sweatshirts.
Yeah, the surf industry approach was always kind of separate but equal, quote unquote equal. Like we'll separate the women and let them have their own thing, their floral surfboards and their pink shirts.
Right.
When all along, maybe we just wanted the same stuff.
Yeah, they might, they might want just a green surfboard.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I remember you telling us that you wanted a log. I'm like, a log? You want a log? Like, I think I have you on video somewhere wanting a log. But you were ahead of your time back then because we had more modern longboards because I won the East Coast Championships on a turning style board.
And they're probably more conducive to the waves we have
the
here,
waves
really.
are short, and I get it. I like a single fin, but I like it lighter.
Yeah.
And you wanted it a single fin like mine, which I was happy. But you wanted a log. You wanted it heavy.
wanted heavy.
Like, why do you want it heavy? You're just going to go slow and sluggish, and
I
you're
love
like,
that.
yeah, but then you can stand on the nose forever and eat a
Yeah.
ham sandwich.
Yep. That was the idea.
Whereas I'm like just touching the nose, and then I got to, my board doesn't nose ride as well as yours because it's
That was a
lighter.
real shift in longboarding
Right.
culture, mostly for me due to Thomas Campbell's films,
Right.
Seedling.
Right.
It was just the Seedling for me,
Right.
watching women like Belinda Baggs ride heavy
You were-
single fin longboards on point breaks in
Right.
Australia and in California, not in Florida.
Right.
But I still wanted to do
See,
that.
You're so much more worldly. And I was being a businessman. I was just stuck in my business in my local Florida. And, that's bad and it's good and it's good and it's bad. It's, it's who we are. And, I had already done my traveling to Hawaii and all this and see this. And I was here to develop a business and, do my thing,
Speaking of being Florida people, you have been outspoken lately on a number of issues, which I have found so brave because you're a local businessman and you rely on local people to support your business, to keep it going, to keep the surf community in St. Augustine with a hub to go and hang out in, like you said before. One of the issues that you've been particularly outspoken on is the issue of gun rights. And guns are a very popular issue. We're in the South. People like to claim their Southern heritage here, and yet you've come out as an opponent of some of these perspectives on gun reform.
And business-wise, I've had a few people say, I'm not shopping at your store because you're against guns and I'm a gun. There's a lot of people that are really, but we're shaped by our environment and by what we see, and we've got to always grow and change. And I changed at a young age. And I've got two experiences that shaped me, that made me, one, when I was a kid, and my Uncle Bill owned the Time Out Lounge at Crescent Beach. Remember the Time Out? And it was an old bar down there. And I was either 15 or I think I might have been after my dad passed away, and I was living at Vale Point. And his bar kept getting broken into. People were going in there and stealing the liquor bottles or whatever. It was way down at Crescent Beach, and this is back in the 70s. And so at one of our family gatherings, he goes, "Can you help me to stop these people breaking in?" I'm like, "Sure, Uncle Bill, I'll help you." I didn't know how I was going to help him. He goes, "Well, come down tonight, and I'm going to need you to spend the night down here and help me." I go, "Okay." And so I got there that night, just being a relative friend, just being, a guy that likes to help. And so it was just right at closing. He handed me a gun, a double barrel shotgun. He goes, "Okay, you had told me I needed to spend the night." So I came prepared to spend the night. He goes, "You're going to sleep in the bar, and I'm giving you this gun." And I go, "I don't know how to." He goes, "Well, here, you pull the triggers like this." He goes, "Stay in here." He goes, "Anybody comes through that door, shoot them." I go, "Okay, Uncle Bill." Here I am, I'm influential. It's either 15 or 16. And I remember staying the night that night. He had some Doberman pinchers in there, and the Doberman pinchers were walking around the pool tables. And middle of the night, they started turning on me because they didn't know who I was. And it was a really scary experience. But I remember thinking what I'm supposed to do if someone comes through the door is shoot him, and he wanted me to kill him or whatever, shoot the people. So flash forward another year or two.
No one came, though, did they?
No one came. I got lucky. I didn't kill anybody. But that's kind of the point of the story, is that's the mentality of, we've got a gun. If there's a bad guy, shoot him. Okay? So, and probably by the law, I would have been justified in shooting someone that broke in. And it might have been some teens coming in to steal some beer from Uncle Bill. Did they deserve to die? I don't know, and I'm not going there. But the other thing in my family, which is very pro-gun, and I love them just the same. We all love each other just the same. But the second thing that shaped me, and even more so than the first experience, was we lived out at Vale Point, and I lived in a house by myself. And they said, "Gosh, if someone ever comes out here, you need to be able to defend yourself. You need to have a gun to defend yourself if someone comes in." And I was given another gun, and it was a double barrel shotgun. And
How
you
old were
keep
you
it
then?
under your bed. I was either 14 or 15. I moved immediately into this little house next door, and it was out in the woods. And I'm 15, and I'm living by myself, and I had my own bedroom. But they said, yeah, if someone breaks into your house, you've got to kill them because they're going to kill you, And it's like, so I remember I was there one night, and my parents were out of town, and it was late night, and I heard something outside the door, and I thought, oh gosh, is this the time someone's going to break into the house? And I go, gosh, did I lock the door? You know what, I think I forgot. And right at the time I was thinking that in my head, I heard the doorknob turn. So the doorknob turned and it opened. And I said, hello, who's there? And nobody said anything. And I thought, they're coming and they're not answering my call. So I reached under the bed and I got the gun. I got the gun out and I said, hello. I didn't hear anything and I heard footsteps. God, they're not answering me. Hello. So I put my finger on the trigger and I pulled the trigger back. And only I know how close I came. The very last second, right before I squeezed, when I saw the shadow, and I said, who is it? And my brother said, Tory? And I went, oh, I was in a cold sweat, and I didn't kill my brother. And it just chills me to this day. And did you know the statistics are, if you have a gun in your house, by far, you're going to kill a family member rather than an intruder. And that's the stats. And I got rid of the gun the next day, and I said, no more guns in my house. I'm not going to kill my brother. My brother wouldn't be here. He's got 3 kids now. They're wonderful. His wife, the Linen and Waves next door to the surf station, wouldn't be there because he would have never married him because he'd have been dead. And I was squeezing the trigger when he said my name. And it would have been tragic, but I would have been off because he was in my house. And, it would have, I don't know how the law would have dealt with it.
But how would you have dealt with it?
And how would I have dealt with it?
That's the more important.
Yeah. And I would have had so much guilt. And I just know that it's not a good thing, So, I respect, all these opinions on this and that, but did you know there's 96 gun deaths a day in America by guns? 96 gun deaths a day. And a lot of them are accidents. And a lot of them are suicides. You're a whole lot less likely to be successful in a country that doesn't have a gun, because if you try suicide by taking pills or some other method, but if you have a gun and you point it to your head and pull the trigger, you're going to be very successful. So, people say, well, people just use them to kill themselves. Well, yeah, guns need to be very hard to get. They need to be like it is in Japan, or a lot of the civilized countries.
Or how about New Zealand?
Or New Zealand. They saw the change. They saw the mass shootings, and they made the change.
To a modern problem,
a
modern issue. You make the modern change.
Yeah. And our president saw that, and he went and had a talk with the NRA, and then he buckled and didn't do it. And whereas there's some vaping, there was 6 deaths, I think, in the last year by vaping, and yet now he's calling to ban vaping, or, how off base is this man, Anyway, I could go round and round.
For me, the most, and I think for the rest of the world, one of the most disturbing aspects of this issue are the school shootings that are just totally unacceptable and heartbreaking. And is that what's been particularly moving for you?
Yes. When you kill kindergartners with an AK-47, I think the person's right to have a gun is trumped by our right to not have our kids murdered in schools and around. And we have to make change. And here's the thing. I don't believe in discussing a problem without a solution. And the problem is it's so massive. And even the politicians, the stuff that they're talking about now, even from the Democratic Party, they're going to put a dent in it, maybe in 10 years. They had the assault weapons ban, and it maybe had some impact, maybe not. But the problem's so big because there's more guns than people. They're everywhere. What we need to do, it's a reboot. You got to reboot.
I think Australia had a voluntary call for everyone to just turn in their guns.
And a lot of people
as a
would.
community, people went, look, this isn't serving us in the way that it used to serve us.
Yes.
Let's forfeit.
Yes.
Not everyone would, of course.
Not everyone would. And there's people in America that they value their guns way more than their children. But in their mind, they're using them to protect themselves from some intruders and from some, even though the statistics are against what they're saying. And the NRA has so much power. And All the Republicans are bought. Pretty much, you can't be a Republican. I'm a Republican, and because of my life, being a businessman. But when I see something that's so wrong, that deals with death of young people, and the big change they made was, okay, instead of being 18 to get an AK-47, in Florida, we made this big change. You can be 21. Now you're 21. That was the big change. They all signed it. It was this great big victory. And believe it or not, that makes some difference because some of the shooters are very young. You're young and you're 19 and you're angry at the world, and you can just go legally buy an AK-47 and go and mow down your old classmates. Whereas some of the other countries are just common sense smart about it. Let me give you a statistic. The United States has 5% of the world's children. We only have 5% of the world's children, yet we have 90% of children's death by guns. That's a fact. So, and when I tell that to someone on the right, because I have most of my friends are gun touting, don't you dare try to mess with my right to have a gun, which I'm not worried about that particular person. We're worried about the criminals having guns. So one, make it super hard to get a gun. Criminals are pretty darn stupid. And I know they'll get them on the black market. Well, then we got to have gun buybacks and keep them off the black market. We spent, in 2008, $19 billion on guns. Well, just a few years later, 2015, we spent $50 billion on guns.
Who's we? The government?
The people.
The
money
people.
Spent on buying guns. It's a multi-billion dollar
So gun sales have gone
industry.
through the roof.
Yes, and the more there's a threat, then every person that already has 5 guns goes out and buys, 6 more.
Yeah.
So
I mean, my dad's a gun-toting Southern man.
The second thing. The first thing I said is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
The second thing is fear. That's what it is. It's fear. If I don't have my gun, someone's going to come and get me. And you're not going to change that person. It's going to take, if the laws don't change, then it's going to take that generation that lives in fear.
Why? What's that fear about?
I don't understand. I'm not scared of nothing.
This is a crazy safe
I'm not scared
part
of
of the world to live in.
Yeah, we're relatively safe,
I mean, compared to lots of places, this is,
right.
We've got it good.
But there's fear.
Extreme privilege.
There's fear. I understand it and I get it, but the answer isn't more guns. More guns is more death. Less guns overall is less death. And you can look at it on a worldwide scale and see it. And all I try to do as my voice, because I'm a voice, is let people know on that issue. And I'm not afraid to talk about it, but I want to be gentle with my friends. And I pointed out to you earlier how there are some friends that we can disagree on this subject, but still have a beer. And my goal is to be able to still have a beer with them, and if they can see that I'm not fearful, I'm not, and I don't believe in a slippery slope. I believe we can have some common sense legislation, but really that's the tip of the iceberg, because this is probably a 50-year problem to solve. We're not going to solve it with a little bit of legislation and go from 18 to 21. Anyway.
Yeah, well, I was just really moved by something you shared with me earlier that said it's the mark of an intelligent person to be able to still be friends with someone that you disagree with.
Yeah, you just have to keep an open mind. And you got to keep the love all around no matter what someone's views are.
Just a quick reminder that we're running our annual giveaway. We're teaming up with our sponsors Sanook and Gary McNeil Concepts to give away some cozy footwear and, for one lucky listener, a brand new custom Gary McNeil surfboard. To enter, all you have to do is hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. Don't forget your name so we can find you, and let us know what you think of the Water People podcast. You'll be entered to win a new custom board in time for the holidays. By rating and reviewing the podcast, you're really just helping us to get the word out, which keeps us digging up new stories and storytellers from our global ocean culture. Special thanks always to our sound engineer and in-house musician, Shannon Soul Carroll. On behalf of myself, Lauren Hill, and my partner in rhyme, Dave Rastovich, thanks for making the time to listen with us. We'll be continuing the conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast. You can find every episode and some extras on our website, waterpeoplepodcast.com.